All right, wonderful students. So today was probably the worst technology day we've had in class all year. I know people were having WebEx trouble. You were having trouble with the audio. My computer stopped working completely, so I was trying to hold class over a phone and a computer that's about 12 years old and slow and did not want to upload anything that we use these days. So, but I appreciate your patience and for trying to help me be flexible there. And some of you asked, could you make a video of what we were doing if you had trouble hearing and because it was so touch and go? And I said, yes, I will make a video. So luckily, because of the snow, my kids' dance is canceled tonight. So it may be loud here, but I can at least stay home and make this video, even though I probably should be putting away laundry. But here we go. All right, so this is going over the multiple choice questions that we did for Unit 2. And a few of them that you all got right, I didn't include here, but I tried to get as many as we could. So which of the following is the best predictor of the Department of Education's annual budget? When you see questions like this, a good strategy is to know that the Department of Education, look at it as like a variable. You could replace it with the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So if it was any of these departments, what would be the best predictor for their annual budget? And the answer is the size of the previous year's budget, right? Because that will be usually within the ballpark. And the preferences of the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, remember, one person would not have that much power. The budget recommendations of the NEA is a union, so they probably would want the budget to be significantly more. And unfortunately, the rate of increase of teachers' salaries is not enough to do that. And plus, teacher salaries are paid on the local level. And kids entering kindergarten would be on the local levels as well. All right, the next question, which of the following best explains why cabinet secretaries might not aggressively pursue the president's policy agenda? Usually cabinet secretaries do, but why might they not? And the answer is cabinet secretaries may develop strong loyalty to their departments and want to do what's best for the department, not just what the president might say. Now, a lot of you put under the Hatch Act, cabinet secretaries are prohibited from campaigning on behalf of the president. So the Hatch Act from 1938, or was it 39? One of the two, it did stop them from doing certain political acts. What is a political act? Campaigning would be, but remember, they're not campaigning here. They're just, what's the agenda? Answer C, I know one person answered that. Cabinet secretaries are likely to compete with the president in a subsequent election. They're not. They're not likely to compete. That has not happened. It could happen. It has not happened that much in our presidency. Hillary Clinton was a Secretary of State that ran for president against Trump, and that ended a drought of decades. The last time a secretary ran for president before that was Herbert Hoover in 1928. But remember, she didn't run against Obama. She was running against a different party. The last Secretary of State to run and become president was James Buchanan. That's way back in 1856. So it's just not a common thing. All right, so this cartoon. So sometimes people don't like the cartoons because you have to use your brain in a way that's it's not a yes or no. It's not a black or white answer, even though it is black and white. But you can think and figure this out. So notice things here. Notice it says 1991. So this relates to things from way before you're dealing with now. If you do remember, we talked about this in one of our videos. 1991 is when Bush nominated Clarence Thomas to become the Supreme Court judge, replacing Thurgood Marshall. So, well, you don't need to know that for this to know this answer. It just puts it in some context. Okay, so what did students notice? Students noticed that all of the judges looked the same. So maybe they're looking like the person that, the president that chose them. They notice 40 more years instead of like the 4 more years that you often hear. Remember this, okay? When we look at these answers. Remember when we looked earlier this year at Judge Amy Coney Barrett being nominated and confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. We discussed how that was the third president that Trump put in the Supreme Court, so that even if he was to not win re-election, which he didn't, he still would have a legacy, if you will, an influence for possibly generations. That she's only in her 40s, right? Kavanaugh is not old either, so that for many years to come. So that's why C is correct. We do know that Supreme Courts issue dissenting opinions. That's something that happens. A few of you put opinions of Supreme Court justices remain very similar over long periods of time. Yes and no. When we look at, the changing views of the court, the change does happen. But we know that C goes along with the cartoon. All right. Next one. The Constitution states that all revenue bills must originate. It's in the House. So I won't sing for you like I was in class, the Schoolhouse Rock, being just a bill on Capitol Hill. But this comes from Article 1, Section 7, Clause 1 of the Constitution. And that says that all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House. But the Senate may still propose or concur with amendments as in other, spending things. But, why this happened, think of this as a compromise, right? Small states were overrepresented in the Senate and large states were underrepresented in the Senate. Think about it, right? Rhode Island has 2 senators and California has 2 senators. And some people are like, oh, that's not cool. So one of the compromises was, okay, so when it comes to things like revenue, right, the purse, Congress has the power of the purse, the House, who represents, the people of the big states as well. That's where it would start. Oops. Did it go right? Okay. Cabinet members often do not have a dominant influence on presidential decision-making. Number 10, presidential goals often conflict with the institutional goals of individual cabinet-level agencies. We see this, right? Presidents have agenda. Cabinet-level agencies have goals, right? Cabinet members, this a question I thought was a little strange because cabinet members sometimes do have a big influence over decision making, but it's always up to the president what kind of influence they sort of want them to have. Cabinet members for letter C can publicly disagree with the president. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. We've seen this happen in the Trump presidency recently. Rex Tillerson, the former Secretary of State, who was replaced by Pompeo, right? He disagreed with the president on many things, from moving the Israel's embassy to Jerusalem, to talks with North Korea, to involvement in Russia, to the point that some foreign countries didn't know, was he representing the U.S. or not? So basically he was fired via tweet, and he's not the only one. So it's not often that cabinet members disagree publicly with the president, but we did see that, right? The Trump turnover rate was like 92% or something much higher than normal. And cabinet members for letter B generally don't view their position as a stepping stone, because remember we said how few cabinet members actually do try to become president. It does happen, but it's not often. Okay. Which of the following is true of the seniority system of Congress in relation to committee leadership and committee staffing? Okay. There's no official rule, but the chairs tend to be senior members. So once again, when we were watching Judge Amy Coney Barrett, those clips, we saw who was the head of the Judiciary Committee. It was Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He's been there for a long time. So it doesn't have to be the oldest, but usually people who are there for a while. Very rarely does a newer member of Congress get, especially significant committees, get that. You see, trying to think of big ones. The chair of the finance is Chuck Grassley. He's a senior member. Remember him, and we always see him wearing his sweater vests. We're going to see, what does it relate to? Does it relate to Senator Leahy, the impeachment? Maybe. Well, we can talk about that. All right. A major difference between the House and the Senate is that there is unlimited debate in the Senate, but not in the House. And primarily, think of it just of logistics. You have 430 something members of the House. Imagine if they could just all talk as long as they wanted and as much as they wanted. Nothing would get done. They would just always be talking. So that's why usually debate on most bills is cut to an hour, and then they divide that time as to who wants to speak. The Senate has some rules like a senator can speak up to 2 times a day for as long as they want on a certain issue, but like there's only 100, so they get more flexibility for that. And we know that each state, we know that letter D is incorrect because equal representation in the House, but not in the Senate. Like what does it have? Each have 2 in the Senate, right? Not the House. Okay, a boundary line of congressional districts, that's drawn by the state legislatures. And if you couldn't remember that, you probably could have remembered from when we studied Baker versus Carr, right? About how the Tennessee state legislatures were dividing districts, but they just weren't updating it every 10 years like their state constitution said they should do after their census. Okay, when a bill passes the House and the Senate in different versions, the bill is resolved by what type of committee? So it's good to know these different types of committees. So a conference committee, they take they reconcile the differences between the House and the Senate with their bills. That's specifically what they're there for. Select committees are on something specific. Select committees that may have come because of COVID, for example. Reconciliation, I don't even know if that is a committee. If it is, I'm drawing a blank. So that might have just been thrown in there. The Rules Committee, that's very important. We learned about that. Remember James McGovern leading the Rules Committee. So they figure out how to expedite the passage of bills and the procedures. And the standing committees are committees that are standing, that are always there, unlike a select committee. It's 15 and 20. Is it 15? I think it's 20 House committees and 15 Senate standing committees. It's one or the other. But for example, like the Committee on Homeland Security, that's always going to be there. Right? The Committee on Health in the House, that's always going to be there. But conference, think that they have to confer. Okay, things aren't matching up. How do we negotiate this? Okay. Cabinet members differ from independent regulatory agencies in which of the following ways? The president can dismiss cabinet officers like we've discussed, but not commissioners of independent regulatory agencies. This was something that brought up some tension in the Trump administration. I'd say it probably does in all administrations to some degree, but realizing when there wasn't certain power the executive had, right, over that, that caused him some frustration. A fundamental source of power, right? Good to know, look back to your federal bureaucracy notes. What can it do? What power does it have? It can set specific guidelines. So Congress gives them a mandate. You need to do something about this. Then they set the guidelines for different things that need to. The ability to convince Congress, that's not so much a power. They try, but they don't always convince Congress. Okay, now this question, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service will spend money appropriated by Congress to maintain wildlife refuges. I never say that right. This action is an example of. Now, don't be thrown off by saying like, I don't know anything about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Just like for the first question on the Department of Education, use that as a variable. The FDA will spend money, right? For example, will spend money on what? So remember, it's C, bureaucratic implementation of law. So there's laws. How will those bureaucracies help carry out those laws, right? So Congress gives money to this. How will the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service carry it out? Okay, and I wanted to end it on one that everyone got right. We all know what bicameralism is, right? A 2-house legislature, like our House and our Senate. And they each have different structures, right? We should know the differences, and they each have different rules, which we should know some of as well. All right, so hope this helps, and hopefully we'll have more easy-flowing days of technology in the future. But as always, we adapt and we overcome. What's one of our STEM values? Perseverance. Or is it persistence?